Good afternoon. My name is Juan J. Castillo, and I am the interim president at Texas A&M International University. It's my honor to welcome both our in-person as well as our virtual attendees to our 29th annual Western Hemispheric Trade Conference. What a dynamic month it's been for trade and the market. Not just for the economies of the Western Hemisphere, but for the global economy as a whole. Conferences like this bring together a learning community of faculty and student scholars and industry experts to discuss relevant and timely issues. And we're likely to see tariffs prominently studied and featured in next year's conference. So stay tuned for that. This event focuses on bringing real-world trade and commerce issues to the forefront, while exploring the powerful economic, political, and social connections between nations. Last night's keynote provided insight into both innovations and risks apparent in the crypto ecosystem. And tomorrow, we'll hear about the global space economy driven by privately held companies and government contracts. As stimulating as these topics may be, the true value of a learning community lies in the active exchange of ideas. I encourage all participants, and especially students, to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and take full advantage of this opportunity to engage with other attendees throughout this conference. I would like to recognize and extend our thanks to all our distinguished speakers. Your expertise and dedication to the pursuit of knowledge make this conference both relevant and meaningful. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to those who have traveled or joined us virtually from universities across the nation and around the world. Your participation underscores the importance of collaboration and enriches the experience for everyone. Once again, welcome to Texas A&M International University and the 29th Annual Western Hemispheric Trade Conference. Dr. Luis Perez-Batres, Dean of the A.R. Sanchez Jr. School of Business, will now introduce the panelists for our luncheon panel discussion. So gentlemen, if you all want to come on up.
Thank you very much, President Castillo. Today, it's really an honor to introduce my dear and accomplished friends. One of them, before I continue, you will see that their expertise, while could not be more different, they will converge beautifully in this dialogue. So with that said, one of them is a distinguished scholar, a true expert in the international business field. I had the pleasure of knowing him from about 15 years, and we have a couple of collaborations already. The other one is a successful business leader and a pilot himself, as we just witnessed. We used to enjoy playing dominoes in the late 1980s, I believe, while we were studying accounting. He's also a pilot, and figuratively and literally has flown into new markets. So with that said, let's take off, Roberto. And so I will be asking you a couple of a question or two during this conversation, and of course to Len as well. And for that, I need my glasses. So these aren't the 1980s for me. So bridging the gap. So that's a question. Many people view finance and engineering as separate worlds. What's the secret to integrating them for business success? Do you have examples, Roberto?
Okay, first and foremost, thank you for inviting me to the conference. It's an honor. Quite honestly, this is my very first conference. And you would be surprised how tightly knit engineering and finance is. You can actually look at it kind of like two sides of the same coin, because one sets the basic groundwork for the results that you measure on the other end in finance, the bottom line. So basically, if you really understand both ends, you're not just bilingual, you actually become indispensable to a company. So, having said that, finance has a lot of interest ratios, such as ROI, cash flow, and let's put it this way, to get to that point, you have to go through design processes, machinery selection, optimizing distribution, logistics. So at the end, the more you understand what's on the upstream, the better understanding you're going to have what your ROI and cash flows are going to be. Finance is full of interesting ratio of marketing valuations, EBITDA. Lots of, you can turn around the financial statement and do all sorts of ratios with it. But at the end of the day, if you really understand what's below it, supporting it, you should be able to make better and better informed decisions as to how to drive a company. I would say that the more that you want to expand your horizons beyond finance, you would be able to drive better results in the end.
Thank you, Roberto. So whether on the ground or on the air, it seems that the collaboration between disciplines, it's a team sport. And so with that said, Len, let me, okay, I need to read that again. I guess I was too braggadocious without my lenses, but we'll see. Len, based on your research, my friend, what characteristics do successful global growth strategies tend to share in common?
Thank you, Luis. And let me also just express my gratitude to everyone from Texas A&M International University for inviting me here. My first time in Laredo was about 15 years old. My father's from Mexico, so we crossed the border to visit family in Monterrey. And now in the last couple of months, I've been here 2 more times, so this is my 3rd time to Laredo. So thank you for the invitation. When we think about global strategies, first let me just amplify the issue, especially for students here, about the multidisciplinary nature of international business. For those of you who are studying IB, I think it's very important to add what we would call a functional area, such as marketing, finance, or operations management to your international business, which I consider more the icing on the cake, but it can make you indispensable when you have those combinations. So successful growth strategies, I think, contain a little bit of aggressiveness, but also humility, because many things can go wrong. So when to go global? Sometimes most companies certainly start as an idea, perhaps in a garage, or playing dominoes, or what have you, and then they proceed and advance and become bigger. Companies grow usually by products or markets. Those are the 2 basic ways that companies can grow. Sometimes companies would end up having slack. What kind of slack? Well, we might consider in the airline industry, where we're talking a little bit about today, they might have excess resources, such as cash, such as human resources that are not so busy, they could have some extra time. They might have flight crews, they might have an aircraft, which would enable them to expand internationally. So first we could start with slack resources. Then companies should be aware of, I'm sure many of you have seen the SWOT model, SWOT. So the strengths and weaknesses are concerned with resources and capabilities that the company might have internally. But they need to align those resources and capabilities with opportunities and threats that exist in the external environment. If they're not aligned, you're going to be either responding to the wrong opportunity or even missing the problem that might be apparent in the external environment. After that, I advise companies when they're internationalizing that cash is king. Cash is always king, and don't try to grow too fast. This can create problems for the company. So don't be fooled by the temptation to overextend. And another way that companies can overextend is by forgetting about the proximity of their operation to the foreign market where they're considering investing in. Now that proximity can take two forms. It can take the form of geographic distance, which we've studied in some of our seminal FDI studies, foreign direct investment, and that distance can also take the form of cultural proximity. So for instance, the US, if you have a company that's based in the US as your domestic operations, you might consider expanding to Mexico because it's geographically proximate, especially to Laredo. It's just a few meters from the border or an inch from the border. Now, culturally, that's not so proximate to the US. It's a different culture. But Canada has both geographic proximity to the US and more cultural proximity. So it's important to think about those. Because when you think about global expansion, I would say, well, let's define global. My good friend and former colleague, Alan Rugman, Professor Rugman, did a lot of work on the globalization of companies, and he found that in most or many cases, it was really regionalization, companies expanding in proximate locations to where they were headquartered. So choose close markets, both geographically and culturally when you're considering international expansion, and don't overextend at the beginning.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those insights, Len. So it seems to me, to put it in a different way, it's not wise to swing for the fences every time we take the bat and try to aim for strengthen our inner strengths, the resources, and align them with the markets that we want to conquer, not overextend. Thank you very much again, Len. So now the topic goes to from spreadsheets to skies. And you will notice a theme that I guess I overdid this pun on aviation, but hopefully it will work out. Now, Roberto, your career path has taken some fascinating turns. You started as an accountant, and now you're the CFO of ATI Jet and a pilot yourself. So did you ever imagine your career taking this flight path?
Well, we've known each other for 40 years. It's been 35 years since we graduated as accountants. So since back then, you might remember, I always had a thing for aviation. So a little bit of my story. Right after college, I moved to Chicago and went and did a master's in sewing machine technology, because my family had been involved in apparel manufacturing since the 1940s. So I wanted to get a good grasp of the whole concept of the operation. Having a manufacturing facility, I really wanted to dig deep into all of the aspects of its operation. So that's how I got into the technical end of things. I always had a keen for mechanical things, but nothing formal until I became a certified technician. Back in the 90s, mid-90s, I opened my apparel retail operation in El Paso, Texas, to move product out of the factories that we had. And that brought me into a pilgrimage every single week for 25 years from Torreon in the factory to El Paso in my office. Spent pretty much 75% of the time in El Paso, overlooking the sales to our U.S. customers and going back to factory just to check on everything that we had on order, to logistics, coordinate delivery dates, all of that. Now you can imagine, after so many years flying into Juarez and having to do the bridge lines to get into El Paso, that got old pretty fast. So 2005, I finally said, you know what, if I'm going to start flying, I got to start flying now. So I got my first license, bought a small piston airplane, and started flying myself from Torreon to El Paso. Voila, no more bridge lines. How great is this? So in that period of time that I started flying into El Paso, by luck of the draw, I got to meet my now business partner, Light Byron, and he was the owner of ATI Jet at the time. It was a small, nimble company with 4 jets, solid reputation, and through talks, I ended up buying 50% of the company back in 2006. And from that point on, we saw that there was potential, but decided to take a pretty cautious approach into growth, one plane at a time, looking at every aspect on how we were going to do that financially, operationally. And over time, by 2008, we had a whole plan of national expansion based on the equipment Learjet 60. And we had everything set out, but unfortunately, 2008, the middle of financial crisis, credit was scarce, interest rates were not the best at all, and there was a general drop in volume of operations that made us leave that in the back burner for a little while. Come 2017, with much better conditions, cheaper interest rates, and a booming market, we decided to put that plan in and start steadily growing, going into more and more airplanes, growing our maintenance base, growing our pilot base, and ultimately, right now, we're up to 26 airplanes from the 4 that I started with back in 2006. So it's been quite a ride, to call it that way, but every step of the way had been analyzed, financially planned, and basically we've just made sure that we're not stretching out our capabilities that would set up us for failure. And that's how I came into this, and I'm pretty happy that I took that leap. After 2005, I totally walked away from apparel, and I'm 100% dedicated to aviation today.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for that story from sewing machines to jet engines. That's quite a runway, my friend. Len, as an expert scholar on international expansion, from your perspective, how do institutional and cultural differences shape cross-border business operations, business operations and success? Can you help us out here?
Sure. Luis, I've done a lot of research using institutional theory as a backdrop or a foundation, and also cross-cultural management. So let's talk about institutions. Institutions deal with basically three components. One is cultural cognitive, the second is regulatory, and the third is normative. So I wrote actually a paper that was one of the first scholars to talk about the process of institutionalization. How do companies begin to think a certain way, or how do they change their institutional profile? And one of the most important components of that, if you look at companies that are interested in investing in countries and selling their products therein, you need to have an educated workforce or an educated consumer, because they're more open to things international companies, international products, etc. And with culture, we actually view culture as, some people would call it cross-national studies. We started to call it cross-sectional, because culture has evolved since 1980, when many of you have heard of Gert Hofstede, who's the grandfather of cross-cultural management, and he identified cultural differences at the national level. Because of so much immigration and other changes, it's hard for us to say the U.S. is like this, or Germany is like that. Think about the differences between South Texas and, say, Northern or Central California, just the difference between those two areas, or the U.S. South or the Northeast. Speak differently, think differently, move faster, move slower. That same thing happens in other international markets, such as Switzerland, where there are four languages, French, Italian, German, and I forget the name of the local Swiss language. So there's 4 languages. So when we do surveys in Switzerland, what are we going to say? The Swiss are like this? Well, they're not like this. So you have to be aware of that from the start. So those are the kind of things you study in the classroom. But if we look at the U.S.-Mexico border, let's take a look at that since we're on top of the border here. And you're a business person, we don't study culture from an anthropological perspective just to know culture. We study culture and institutions in terms of how it can affect our business operations. How do we make the best decisions? So when we're sending a manager abroad, say from the U.S. to Mexico, we can look at Gert Hofstede's cultural value systems and say that power distance, the distance between, say, the employee and the superior, is it high or is it low? In Mexico, it's very high and it's very hierarchical. In the U.S., it's lower, and so the organizational structures tend to be a little flatter. What does that mean in practice? That means that if I'm a U.S. manager and I'm not really trained in cultural differences, I understand we try to delegate because I'm super busy. I just want to tell you, go solve this problem and figure out how to solve this problem. If I come into Mexico and try to implement that same kind of strategy, people, they're not going to say, what do you mean? But they're not used to so much thinking that way. They're used to the figure at the top of the hierarchy telling them what to do and how to do it. So you might run into some problems there. So that means that from a strategy perspective, you might not get what you want. I found this story interesting that I use in the classroom sometimes. This U.S. manager is in Mexico, and he has, I think, a Jeep or something that he's been driving around, and it had some problems. So the mechanic had to fix the car. So the U.S. manager comes in on a Friday afternoon, and he says, will this be ready to go Monday? He says, sí, senor, it's going to be ready on Monday. Everything's going to be fine. So Monday, the U.S. manager comes in, and it's torn, all the car is torn apart, parts all over the floor, and he was irate. I thought you told me it was going to be ready on Monday. And he said, well, sir, I didn't want you to have a bad weekend, letting you know it was not going to be ready. So now I tell you it's not going to be ready. different perspectives, different people, different thinking, short-term, long-term thinking. So you have to be prepared in international business for the unpredictable. If you're too kind of jittery or too anxious, you're going to run into problems with travel because things are going to go wrong. Things are going to happen you're not aware of. People think differently. You can't expect to act them like when you're at home. My best advice that I give to myself when I travel someplace, China, Netherlands, and I try to learn a couple sentences in that language so people can understand I'm trying. The problem I have is I have a good ear for accents, so if I say something like, I know I'm like a 5-year-old in Russian maybe, so I came to Russia one time and I say, "Izvinite, говорите ли вы по-английски?" So they hear me say it and it's got a pretty good accent, so they just start going on and on. But it's really important just to demonstrate that willingness to, when in Rome, think like they do. And one final thing, I did a study in the 1990s on how Mexican managers were responding to NAFTA. And at the time, so I visited managers in Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Mexico City. Once again, 3 different societies, they think differently. In Monterrey, it's probably closest to the U.S. way of thinking, sort of fast, let's go, no time. In Guadalajara, people want to sit down, talk to me, how are you doing, tell me about your family. Mexico City, maybe somewhere in between. But anyway, what I found was, interestingly enough, Mexico became a signatory to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in 1987. One of the first countries, Chile was the first, to kind of open themselves up to the global economy. But we found that Mexican managers in the early 1990s had significantly adapted their strategies, because if they hadn't done that, they would have gone out of business, because now they were open to exports, to imports from Germany, Japan, and world-class products. However, I found at that time that they were slow to change their structures. Why? I have my suspicions, because people don't like to let go of power. In a hierarchical structure, you know where the power resides. So I haven't done some research down there on strategy and structure recently, but I'm sure it's changed in that regard. So institutions and cultural differences, extremely important.
Thank you very much, Len. Quite an insight. Cultural fit can certainly make or break a corporation. Fortunately, I was able to experience that, and as far as Russian, I only know one word, privyet. So I guess that's hello, I think. So that's probably one way of doing it. Roberto, on balancing the books and the runway. Running a company like ATI Jet requires both financial discipline and technical expertise. How do you balance the precision of accounting with the fast-paced world of aviation?
Yes, it's a pretty delicate balance to have both the technical aspect of the operation with the finances. We're on a pretty sophisticated software that pretty much gives us a daily tracking of our direct operating cost of the aircraft as it's input by the pilots as soon as they land, as far as fuel burns, flight times, and that leads us to controlling what the engine reserve price is going to be, what the fuel cost for the trip was. So we rely on pretty sophisticated software, but it's transparent, and we are pretty much real-time knowing exactly how much are we expensing. Now, can we do something about the direct operating costs? On a limited basis, yes. We can pick up who the cheapest fuel vendor is. We may offer an alternate airport to the customer that we can go, that it would be probably closer to wherever they're going, or we have cheaper fuel, because in the end, that's their bill. They have to pay for it. So there's some leeway into controlling the direct operating cost, but it's pretty much online at all times. We know what the cost of operating the company is. And yeah, it's a delicate balance. Then we have the scheduled maintenance of the aircraft, and then we have the unexpected. I mean, like all equipment, it's prone to have a mechanical failure here and there. You have no idea how many late flights I've done flying mechanics and parts to rescue an aircraft that we had down at some interesting place in the Midwest or the Pacific, North Pacific, or everywhere. So, we keep a pretty tight cost control on everything that we do, and you have to balance it. Sometimes you gotta choose into incurring an expense. It's probably for me cheaper to run one of our airplanes with mechanics and parts to rescue a flight that it's booked for the next day, that it's probably 3 times as much as the cost of the flight going and rescue the airplane. So decisions that you gotta make, sometimes you have to give some leeway to unexpected expenses. We try to keep them at a minimum. And again, it's all transparent because it's all online, whether it's an internal flight for the company or a chartered flight. So we try to balance them as much as we can, and the technical decisions and the financial decisions, what makes sense and what doesn't.
Okay, so I guess that what I understood is that balancing spreadsheets and jet fuel is pretty easy, right? Anyway, Len, it seems that aviation can be as much about people as planes. How can companies manage people across cultures? So kind of following up, especially when expanding internationally or managing cross-border teams. How do they get it right?
Great question, Luis. Managing people is extremely important, and I think it's very important to have the right person in the right place. I guess you could say at the right time as well. But I'm going to share just some research that it's not even published yet. And I'm going to ask the audience a question. And don't consult with Dr. Ned back here because he knows the answer already to this question. So I did some research on Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate economist. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And so we basically tested Kahneman's theory on gender. So if you want to think about thinking fast, it's when you have to make a decision sort of within seconds kind of thing, or maybe maximum in 1 minute kind of thing. And thinking slow would be a decision like managing a portfolio of businesses. You have time to ponder, do I want to acquire this company? Do I want to spin off that company, etc.? Who do you think does better with slow, protracted decisions, men or women? Raise a hand for men.
Slow? You mean slow? Or
Slow.
Slow.
Slow decisions. Okay, 3, 4 for men. Okay, women. Very good. Women do better with slow decisions. So I guess that would mean men do better with fast decisions. So with women, we know as female CEOs, even though they only represent 7% of Fortune 500 companies, that, I'm going to say something that might be controversial, they do a better job than men if you value income stability. This is not up to debate. Journal of Finance, Journal of Financial Economics, University of Chicago, etc. But men, why are they not? Because they take bigger risks. So it can be this, it can be that, it can go like that. So women, more stability of earnings. So men do a better job with fast decisions. Our study involved women's college basketball, and we studied 3 seasons, only when the journal asked us to collect 2 more seasons of data, otherwise we're not going to publish it, and it's still not published yet, but I think it's going in the right direction. So men actually win more games, male coaches of women's college basketball, with inferior talent, meaning women recruit better kind of thing. So anyway, I'll if you want the copy of the paper, send me a message, and I'll get it to you after it gets published. So internationally, this is very important because having the right people in the right place, that's the right tech person, the right finance person, especially when you're thinking about doing an acquisition or a joint venture, and you cannot forget about implementation, because I can make the acquisition But was it a good decision? Well, we don't know until it becomes implemented. But we know University of Pennsylvania conducted a study and found that up to 90% of strategies that were effectively formulated fail in some form to be implemented as they were intended. So as undergraduate students or MBAs, think about it. If you go into a company, or if you do an interview with a company and there's a case interview and they ask you to solve this case, okay, solve the case. But take it one step farther and say, well, I remember that 90% of strategies don't get implemented correctly. So here's my implementation action plan, and I guarantee you put yourself in a better position to get the job. Putting the right people in the right place, thinking about implementation, and then having culturally savvy leaders, training them even to be ambidextrous. We talked about this in the paper, knowing how to make fast twitch decisions and slow twitch decisions. So if you don't have both of those, try to become more of an ambidextrous manager. Have local empowerment, because I used to work in advertising at Leo Burnett in Chicago, and I was responsible for some areas of Latin American operations for ready-to-eat cereals, Kellogg's. And I remembered one of the studies that looked at when Chevrolet named the car the Nova. Well, what does it mean in Spanish? It doesn't go. Probably not the best name for an automobile, and it wasn't. So it's important to have local impact. They're going to know more than I am. In China, they did another one. Coca-Cola put a slogan out there, and they translated it. I don't know what the English was, but when it was translated from Chinese into English, it came up to bite the wax tadpole. Right? Electrolux, another one. If you don't use the local empowerment, they came up with a slogan that said, nothing sucks like an Electrolux in the US, from the Swedish company. So these are kind of things that, these are Harvard educated, yeah, we know better. No, get the locals involved kind of thing. So important to do strategic human resource management.
Thank you very much, Len. Yes, so the importance of working across cultures, thank you very much for this enlightened answer, and in practical terms too. Now, Roberto, let's zoom out. Biggest takeoff moment. Every entrepreneur has a defining moment when things really take off. What was that moment for you and ATI Jet?
Yeah, as I briefly mentioned it a little bit ago, it was the launch of our Lear 60 program, and well, I had to sit in the back burner for a few years because of the conditions back since when we created the concept to where we actually started implementing it. Throughout those years, we kept the same approach of steadily growing, one plane at a time, keep everything tight and under control. Paraphrasing Len, what he mentioned earlier today, those big plans for growth can get pretty wild and out of control. So you have to take a measured approach. Growth can come if you do it orderly. A disordered growth plan will end up always in disaster. So we had to wait for our moment. We started finally doing that right after 2017. And even though it's been much fast-paced than we had been doing in the past, it's still pretty orderly. The organization has grown as it needed in personnel and all areas, maintenance, support staff, pilots, but had always been under the strategy outlined right from the get-go. There's always a ratio of personnel per airplane. So we have to stick to it, not move from it. It's pretty tempting because you think, okay, well, I mean, I'm halfway there. I better start bringing in more people because we're going to be doing this much more when we don't even have the equipment yet. So we have to pace it out, fast-paced, but pace it out, And in the end, it's just discipline. Well, takes you there. I've seen great engineering ideas being financial disasters, and not so great engineering ideas become total success. I mean, we got down to marketing too, so you gotta keep a pretty good balance on everything. Not just wing it, you have to be pretty disciplined.
So we
Luis,
learned
can
that
I-
first flying.
Just add something to that?
Yes, of course.
Is that working? Yeah. Both Roberto and I have been emphasizing the slow, steady pace for growth, but I want to just mention sometimes you have to go fast. And I'll give you an example. When I was working in the advertising agency, I worked on the Kellogg's ready-to-eat cereal business. So we were putting together this cereal called Raisin Squares. It's no longer, it didn't make it. I don't know how long it did, but it was a big deal back then. And that was a raisin in every bite. So they put the raisin goop inside the wheat square, and we got wind that I think it was Nabisco or Post had the same idea. So we went from concept to on the shelf in 90 days because we wanted to be first. And I also was responsible for another product that's still in the market, which is Nutri-Grain bars, but we were able to take a more measured approach with that. In fact, it started off as a very healthy product, and I was eating them prototypes because they were right under my desk, and I'm kind of a healthy eater. But then they decided there wasn't enough market for that, so they turned it into a candy bar. But sometimes you have to go fast because of the competition.
Right, and I think it's about it really that comment lends itself. First of all, just to finish the point, Roberto. So it's about risk management, being disciplined, and that discipline can have different shapes. What I'm hearing from you, Len, is that sometimes you have to go fast, and I trust that companies have certain protocols when to do that. You have to follow it and be fast when you need to be. And from that aspect, I guess it's also a balancing act on risk. So I have had the honor of co-authoring in some topics about risk with you. And so in your view, how do firms navigate risk in international markets? And what separates the resilient ones?
Luis was the brains behind our paper. You see, he's the first author on that. So risk management, first I would say, let's define risk. Because when you think of internationalization and you do foreign direct investment, what's riskier, a licensing agreement or a foreign direct investment where you build a plant? Who thinks foreign direct investment would be riskier? Who thinks licensing would be riskier? Nobody. Okay, I'm going to say licensing would be riskier. But it depends on how either answer could be correct. If you consider risk the financial outlay, if I build the plant, that costs a lot of money. If I license, I just have to say, hey, you can go license to do my product, and you pay me royalties. What could be less risky than that? Well, what if the person is not so scrupulous, and they learn how to produce the product? Let's say it's communication chipsets. They say, well, after a year, we don't need you anymore. We're going to go on our own. Okay, so that's called the competitive usurpation of my knowledge. So it depends how you describe risk. But I was in a doctoral class, and the professor said, tell me about this international business. It was a strategy class. I was the only international business major there, and he said, well, I don't think it's any different than domestic business. You have strategy, you have finance, you have operations. My answer was, well, professor, it's a difference between degree and kind. Yes, it's the same kind, but it's a different degree. It's much more complex in international business, and in fact, someone much more famous than I elucidated those ideas in 1960, and it was published posthumously in 1976, a guy named Stephen Heimer, who's the grandfather of foreign direct investment and internationalization. And he coined the term liability of foreignness. So if you're a foreigner coming into a new country, You better as heck build a better mousetrap, because you're not going to know the legal system, you don't know the currency, you don't know the language, you don't know anything, except if you have an innovative, better product, you got a fighting chance kind of thing. So what other kinds of risks? Political volatility, regulatory uncertainty, institutional voids, exchange rate fluctuations. We could give the example of in about 1981-ish or so, the Mexican peso devalued 10 to 1, right? 81, 82, someplace in there, a lot. So companies, U.S. banks were awash with petrodollars. And they got greedy, they wanted to loan that money to Mexican companies or even U.S. companies operating in Mexico. But what they did was they had a currency mismatch on the balance sheet. They had assets and revenues in pesos and liabilities in U.S. dollars. Not a good combination if the peso drops 10 to 1. Your $10 million loan quickly turned into $100 million. So companies that were affected by that is one that I interviewed called Grupo Alfa in Mexico, and I know the last name is Garza, Roberto Garza, because my brother-in-law went to school with Roberto Garza, yo creo, in Monterrey, in Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, in my home state of Indiana, in my alma mater. So they had foreign loans and peso revenues, the same kind of thing. So in 1981, they had a loss of $120 million versus an initial projection of $80 million on the plus side. And in 1982, it didn't get any better with $233 million loss. So you can eliminate that by borrowing in pesos and paying back in pesos. That's a balance sheet hedge. So the research with Dean Perez, just start with a better mousetrap, and then we talked about using the layered approach, real options thinking, continually monitoring the external environment, and then having the local empowerment as well. So build flexibility into your international operations.
Thank you very much, Len, and I appreciate the comments. Thank you. Roberto, staying on topic, risk and reward. Flying a jet and managing a business involve risk. Do you approach financial decisions the same way you approach flying?
Yes, you would be surprised how one is closely related to the other in terms of management of risk. As a public transport company, we're heavily regulated by the FAA, so we have to operate under pretty strict guidelines as far as checklists, security procedures, evaluation systems, and in the end of time, it's all for the interest of public safety. Now, in terms of finance, we approach every project starting with the question, okay, what can go wrong? Do we really need to invest in this? Do we have, what is gonna be the net result of it, and how much is gonna bring to the bottom line? Do we have the appropriate funding sources? Is this going to affect our borrowing capabilities in the future? So everything gets analyzed prior to taking another financial risk in terms of investments. So yeah, they're closely related. I mean, they're matrices that have to be analyzed prior to either taking off or taking a decision. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting in my cockpit at 40,000 foot or I'm firmly planted to my desk analyzing the numbers. Have to be careful on how you pull the trigger on something. You always have to be analyzing, thinking ahead, what we call in aviation, it's situational awareness. What's going on around you and how is that going to affect you?
So what I'm understanding is that we need to be disciplined both in the cockpit and the boardroom. So, Len, Turning to your work, now it's my turn to mention that recognize you as a prolific researcher and very worldwide known. You have published widely in international strategy and management. Which idea or concept do you wish more practitioners understood and why?
Yes, Luis, it's a good question because I'm going to talk about something that I think is very important in this current economic environment of political instability and some other considerations. So I'm going to talk about a concept that we call deep level structures. And deep level structures, I'm going to contrast that with surface level communication. And I use the analogy of a sailboat. Think about the sails as the surface level communication and the deep level structure as the rudder. So the boat, if the rudder goes out, the boat's going to just flounder around and not know where it's going to go. So you control, of course the sails have a usage as well. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of decisions that a company makes if they want to move in a pivot in a different direction. I'm working on a theory paper right now that's still in its fairly early stages, but I've kind of been working on it a little bit off and on for a year. So sometimes these top papers can take years from start to finish. Sometimes they go faster. This one is going to take some time. But let's say, suppose firms claim to want to pursue a bold strategic objective, such as responding to some of the wicked problems that the United Nations called, such as lack of clean water for everybody, such as equal education, such as gender equality. There's 17 sustainable development goals. So let's say about the company that wants to respond to climate change or whatever that is, whatever that initiative is, that would maybe make some kind of strategic shift. Most companies are doing some kind of corporate social responsibility, helping the community, building hospitals, something like building schools, etc. So if the deep level structures in the organization don't match the vision that the company has, then we're likely to be seeing the surface level communication being no more than symbolic at best and what we call greenwashing at worst. So better not to do anything, but companies want to say they're doing something, the talk, and sometimes not have the walk to back it up. So I believe that you need to have that deep level structural change. What is deep level structural change? It's the culture, it's the way of thinking, the way of being, behaving, things you cannot see, but they're there. You cannot see the rudder, but it's there. So if we don't have that deep level structural change, the company is not going to pivot. It's not going to go where it claims it wants to go. So deep level structures, important for companies to recognize who and what they are and what their vision is.
Thank you, Len. So the idea is to align the deep level, the investment, and with the signal. So to close the last couple of questions, Roberto, let's close with a personal reflection. Looking back, looking forward, if you could go back and give your younger self a piece of advice when you were starting out, what would it be? That is probably helpful for our students as well. I'm still young, so I might learn a thing or two too. And what excites you most about the future of ATI yet as well? Thank you.
Okay, well, if I were to look back and see, I've been pretty happy what I've done throughout my life. If there was one thing that I wish I should have done sooner, was learning to fly. But other than that, I am really happy on the path that my life has taken business-wise over the last 35 years. And I see bright opportunity. We've grown a business that was a nimble four-plane operation to a nationally recognized fleet that sprawling all over the U.S. at all times. And that gives me a sense of satisfaction now looking into the future. Yeah, we keep looking into more growth, and that eventually should lead into being an attractive investment for a much larger company. That's how you crown so many years of dedication, effort, by getting to that point and being a target for a larger company to buy you out or to partner with you one way or the other, because that's a crowning of so many years of effort. Now, if I would like to relay a message to all of the alumni of the university and alumni of other universities watching this presentation, is if you're majoring in some sort of finance, that's great, it's pretty interesting, it's passionate, but don't overlook, try to spark your curiosity and learn also technical sides, because you will become a much more well-rounded person that would have more to offer to whatever you end up working. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much for those personal insights and the message, the personal message to Roberto. Len, looking into the future, what trends or shifts in international business should leaders be watching, especially in fast-moving sectors such as aviation or tech-enabled services?
Concerning the future, Luis, I think it's important to think about, first and foremost, what Michael Porter said in 1985. Innovation is the foundation for any type of growth or any type of staying in business from an evolutionary perspective. We need to be innovative. And these days, I would say that we need to think about the digitalization of international business. Although I haven't done any work on that, in that area, I'm not opposed to it. And it's certainly something that others are working hard on. Digitalization, we could call that the instantaneous exchange of digital content. And so digital globalization could deal with platforms, services, big data. Think of how quickly you can scale your operation if it's digitalized. So that's the first thing. So why some countries are focused, some developed and advanced countries are focused so much on manufacturing, I cannot understand. In the US, our manufacturing percent of GDP is 11 or 13%, somewhere thereabouts. So I don't think it makes any sense to focus on that area. So why regress kind of thing. The second thing is to be concerned with the geopolitical fragmentation. We have the war in Ukraine where Russia unprovoked invaded Ukraine and is taken up to 15-20% of its territory, or holds it at the moment. Tensions in the Middle East, which have been omnipresent for the last 50, 60, 70 years, events surrounding China and Russia, all of this creates uncertain environments, which companies don't really like that. So having the ability to be flexible, it takes us back to that idea, what Luis and I have talked about in our work, being flexible in your global operations. And then the third area to think about is what is termed the acronym ESG, or environmental, societal, and governance. What's happening in the external environment, what's happening in society, what does society demand of me as a company, and what about kind of governance structure. It's not okay for us to really just pursue, in my opinion, to pursue a model of shareholder, we only have to respond to the shareholder demands, those who own stock in our company. Professor Freeman talked about the stakeholder approach, who has a stake in our company. This could be consumers, it could be people that live around a plant that I have that's polluting the environment. And so understanding that environment and how I'm responsible to societies where I'm operating is, I think, an important component for those companies that want to stay in business in the future. And we could call that, what is my social performance? We just published a paper, it's forthcoming in Human Resource Management, where our dependent variable is social performance. And then, in conclusion, this means that the institutional and political realignment that we're seeing in today's environment pushes us back to the component of being flexible, but having a sense of purpose as an organization, and aligning those deep level structures with my surface level communication, how I communicate with my shareholders, with my stakeholders, and with the communities within which I operate.
Thank you very much, Len. Yes, purpose is a powerful word, and I would like to thank you both, Len, Roberto. This has been an enriching conversation. We cover several topics: strategy, risk management, what else? Cultural fit, even career reinvention. Thank you both for gifting us your expertise, time, and talent in this afternoon. And for the audience, myself included, let's keep being curious. Let's keep grounded on values and discipline. Let's be ready for takeoff. George, this is my first time here, so I do not know if there is time for one question or two, or what is the drill?
If there's questions from the audience, please put up your hand, and we'll bring you a microphone, and you can ask questions. We do have some time for this.
Well, certainly an enlightened conversation. Thank you for coming to Laredo and exploring our border town. I have a question concerning, this goes to either one of you. I like to say that status quo is best quo, especially when it comes to governance and governance issues. In an environment right now where we're really not quite sure what transborder tariffs and trade will look like in the next 24 hours even, how do you navigate the culture between like the United States and Mexico, or Mexico and Canada? What advice could you give to people on the border how to essentially, I'm not going to say apologize for the administration, but how do you explain to a Mexican or to a Canadian what's going on here in the United States?
I'll take it. All right. We have to understand that in the end, it's not the first time that there's been trade disputes, that all of this is going to settle out. We know what the bottom line of the strategy is. We have an administration that's trying to combat drug trafficking. And I've gone through so many crises in Mexico that I can tell you, just wait, it'll wash out. It'll wash out. I mean, I was born in a crisis in Mexico in 68, 76, 82, 88, 94, 2000, 2006. So trust me, I mean, it may seem like it's chaos right now, but it's going to wash out. Just sit tight and wait. This is going to pass, and it's not going to be more than 6 months. Everything will turn back to normal.
I'll take a shot at that. When it comes to tariffs, I think one of the concerns that I have is I'm a proponent of tariffs when they're used strategically. For example, it's true that some of the Asian countries use what we call non-tariff barriers. So for instance, China has a tendency to use an artificially low exchange rate because that can benefit its export markets. So sometimes, you know, the tariff might be useful in that particular area. But I think this, to say that it will wash out, I think it's certainly going to wash out to some degree. But in some respects, I think there's some damage that will have been caused to our allies. And so I advise them to, we know that this strategy of protectionism, if you want to call it that, is, and we tried this in 1930, and it didn't work very well. So I agree with tariffs if there's a strategic purpose. And I think wholesale changes, or changing one today, doing another one tomorrow, is not the best strategic response, not the best strategy for that. This may be somewhat of a controversial topic. Everyone has their right to their opinion about how these things are going to work, but I think the danger of a recession is certainly there, and I think they should have been used more strategically. For instance, Europe, we have a trade surplus with Europe. So why go after Europe, for instance? Anyway, I think that tariffs could be used more strategically. So that's my take on it. Thank you.
So I will remain Switzerland in this case. And so what I have to say, Andrew, thank you very much for your question, is to focus on the change, in other words, in the rules of the game, how they are changing, so that we're better off adapting to them. And so that would be my take on that situation. Any other question? Thank you, Mon.
Thank you so much for your advice and information. About 2 weeks ago, Wall Street Journal actually predicted that because of this tariff and all other things happening out there, they think that all the manufacturing facilities built by Asian companies will move from Mexico to Brazil. So they expected that Brazil will be the beneficiary of all these trade wars. So my question is, from Mexican government perspective or from the other side of the borders perspective, what are the preventive controls or at least a strategy to protect the jobs for Mexican citizens who've been already built by all these companies? Thank you.
Can I ask I didn't read the article, but what was the rationale for the move from Mexico to Brazil in the article?
Firstly, so far, all these manufacturing companies were built by automobile companies. I say Europe or China or Koreans. So it's been already established for the past 7 or 8 years. But they think that they're, because of this tariff, because of the geographical proximity that we have within US and Mexico, it was easier. But they think that, especially China, they think that let's change the partner. And so they think of Brazil as the next target, like to actually export and import. So building a new partnership with other Latin American countries.
But the products to them would be exported back to China, for instance?
Exactly. So basically, they're trying to increase the activities. In that way, both U.S. and Mexico will be the second mover, obviously, because if they're trying to compete against China, and it's not going to only impact the U.S., but actually because we are geographically located, Mexico and the U.S., if they change the partner, if they import soybeans from Brazil instead of Canada, it's a it's a losing game. So I was thinking, because it's important to protect the jobs for the locals in Mexico. In that way, they can actually keep working. It's good for Mexico. But if that happens, how are you going to protect yourself? So that was my question.
So I'll just continue if that's okay. I think this, if the jobs stay in Mexico, it's probably good for the U.S. as well, because that's going to then stop the pressure for migrating kind of thing, which I think there's a lot of solutions we can do to counteract the migration problem, including developing the hub in these countries of Central America to have more manufacturing facilities that can ship products to the U.S. I know they already have some in textiles and other areas, agricultural certainly, but really maybe putting efforts into that. But from Mexico, if we lose a lot of jobs there to, say, Brazil, then that's going to lose revenues, which could fight narco trafficking, drugs, and other things. So I don't think it's the best idea. But in terms of proximity, U.S. and Mexico, of course, if those automobile parts are going to be shipped to the U.S. for inclusion in the value chain process, then it only makes sense for them to come from Mexico because it's more proximate to the U.S. We're in the process of looking at a study that builds on one that we did about 15 years ago, right when I met Luis. I got published in Journal of International Business Studies on consumer animosity. So what's happening with these tariffs is it extends beyond that. So some consumers are developing animosity toward American products. The Canadians don't want to buy bourbon, don't want to travel to the U.S., and so on and so forth. Animosity can be long-lived. The first study on consumer animosity by Professor Jill Klein, published in about 1980-something, used the Japanese example. U.S. consumers were upset with the Japanese were upset with the Japanese for bombing Pearl Harbor in the 1940s, kind of thing. So it's important with these tariffs and other considerations to consider the impact long-term as well as the short-term.
We probably have time for one more question.
Yeah, challenging times, because I remember last year when we were preparing for the conference, we were talking about offshoring. Now we talk about reverse tariffs. So my question, both from the academic perspective and from the practice perspective, you're bringing the ESG thing, and we know tariffs are always anti-consumer, at least in literature sense. So will the companies take these shocks and be ready investing in deep structure so that that won't pass to the consumers? So they take it as like reducing the price, or will they pass this to the burden to the consumers? And on the employment side, when you think about deep structure, will this ESG consent be there, or they think about their profit maximization orientation?
Yeah, well, about the ESG, there's ways to comply with it. Our industry is trying to, since we're known, aviation as a whole, as a pollutant, there's efforts being made to improve that image. There's a carbon offset, some companies are using it. There's developments on sustainable aviation fuel that don't pollute as much. Unfortunately, that's a development that it's years out from being commercially implementable as a whole. In the end, you gotta keep an eye on your cost, because those things cost money. So how much is your image worth to an audience that may not really care at all about it? I am in a sector that it's well known. Most of our customers, don't really think much about what's coming out of the turbines on the back, because they want to get to some place, they have the money to pay for a private service, they value their time. And so it's a perspective. There might be a lot of other industries that have an image to keep. but unfortunately, not all of them are suitable like that. That's my take on that. And in the end, you gotta watch your costs.
Thank you, Ajit, for that interesting question. I'll comment first on the tariffs. I think who's going to bear the brunt of that? Tariffs are a tax. So a tariff is a tax. It's a 25% tax, a 50% tax, whatever that is, and the consumer is going to pay that with increased prices. So that obviously leads to inflation, and which begets my point is tariffs should be used strategically towards, say, China or Vietnam or one country, and not without strategy. Regarding ESG, you know, Roberto is correct in the sense that some companies are going to take this differently. We could run the gamut from, say, on the left side of the scale, a company like Patagonia, which is basically turned all of its profits are going to go to Mother Earth in the founder of that company's will kind of thing. Eileen Fisher also has a very, which she makes dresses and fashion, she also has a very, I guess we could say, societally driven company kind of thing, as opposed to maybe BP oil or something like that might be, or some of these pharma companies. And I hate to say just an industry, because it's really hard to say this industry is like this. So some of the price gougers in the pharmaceutical industry, et cetera. Why can't we just go to Canada and buy the drugs for 1/10 of the price, for example? I'm all for companies have to make an economic profit naturally. Otherwise, why would they be in business? But I think increasingly, I see that companies are going to have to be beholden to society. They have great responsibility. Many of the companies like Apple and Meta and ABC, whatever, they're bigger than a lot of countries. And United Nations has said that we cannot resolve these societal grand challenges without the help of multinational enterprises. So in my opinion, the evolutionary scale eventually, I don't know what eventually means, 10, 20, 30 years, is going to move in that direction. Companies that are going to survive are going to be beholden not just to shareholders, but also to stakeholders and society at large.
Well, once again, thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much for your answers. And it is time, I have been told that it's time to give a recognition to our speakers this afternoon. So one of them, it's a globe. I understand that we used to have a globe here at Texas A&M International University. So I will proceed with these. I should have done this beforehand. So Roberto, here is to you the globe for, again, Texas A&M International University. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Len, we have the same. I'm not very handy, and Christina, my wife, can attest to that. So thank you very much for your patience. Len, I present you with, thank you, the Globe, Texas A&M International. Thank you very much, my friend.
I see it's a sustainable globe.
Thank you very much, everybody.